Hey, sometimes we just make it a little bit too complicated, don't we? Talk about getting to know your neighbor, talk about sharing your faith, and man, we can really overcomplicate some things sometimes. I don't know if you've ever felt that way, if you've ever got to know those kind of people that just seem to make it so complicated. But if we're going to live this life on mission, which is a series that we're in, this is week 2, and welcome to it. As we talk about week 2 and connect today, we've got to get to know some people. We got to get to know some people around us, some people that we have relationships with, and some people that we don't have relationships with. And if you remember last week when Jesus said that I'm going to send you and you're going to be my witnesses in Jerusalem. Do you remember that? In Jerusalem. Then that means we got to get to know the people around us. In your bulletin today, there's a little handout that we put in there, and I think at the top it says, know your neighbor. And it kind of shows your house, and it kind of shows all the houses around you. And that's just for you to take home, once again, just a challenge. But how many of you can name all the people that live around you? How many of you can actually do that? And some of you are laughing uncomfortably already. And some of you are laughing because you live in the country, and they're 3 miles to your north. But hey, we're saying get to know the people around you. Can you name those people? And if you can't, maybe that's God's challenge for you this week, is to get out and to meet some people and get to know your neighbors. I think it's a good place to start. I think that the average Christian would say that it's hard to live a life on mission because we simply don't understand what it's supposed to be. We've come up with so many programs and strategies and campaigns and formulas, but I think we should simplify it. I think we should just start and look at, what did Jesus do? As the Son of God who came, who gave us this mission, what did he do to connect with lost people? And what we're going to learn is, if we want to connect with people, with our friends, with our neighbors, if we'll just do that, we're way ahead of the game in being able to share our faith and live out this life on mission. If you have your Bibles, I want you to turn to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19. Gospel of Luke, chapter 19. If you have your phone or your iPad, your tablet, you can go and get the QR code on the front of the bulletin and scan that and get right where we're at. If you have no Bible with you and you say, I really want to read this, this is one of those I'd like for you to follow along, you can just grab that Bible that's in the seat around you, turn to page 732, and you'll be right there at Luke chapter 19. Today, Luke chapter 19 is about a wee little man. We're going to read the story about a wee little man named Zacchaeus. And there's some kids in here today. This is a good thing that it's family day. So I bet you guys know a little bit about Zacchaeus. In fact, maybe some of you adults sang a song. Do you remember singing a song when you were a child? Remember that song, Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in a sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see. And as the Savior passed that way, he looked up in the tree and he said, Zacchaeus, you come down, for I'm going to your house today. I'm going to your house today. And that song is really actually pretty accurate with the story, but I think there's a little more to it that maybe we can bring out this morning. So Luke 19, beginning there with verse 1, the story of Zacchaeus, and this is what it says. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. Okay, Jericho is a major city, kind of be like Dallas-Fort Worth. Someone asked me earlier, would it be like Dallas-Fort Worth? Yes. Okay, major city, it's a thoroughfare. There's a lot of commerce there. So it's a place where people wanted to be. So Jesus entered Jericho and was just passing through. He's on his way to somewhere else. And a man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. Now, when we read these biblical stories, we have to understand, a lot of times we're getting a synopsis, we're getting a summary of what happened. We don't get every detail. But sometimes the writers want us to know some things about these people, and there's a couple of key ones right here. First of all, he was a chief tax collector. Now, I remember from my Sunday school days, when I was a child, I remember that Zacchaeus was a tax collector, but I did not remember that he was a chief tax collector, and I was like, what does that mean exactly? Well, when you read and you study, you find out that most scholars believe that the chief tax collector was like the higher-ups. And so if he was the chief tax collector of Jericho, that means that the city of Jericho and all the region around it, which was extremely large, extremely well-populated, lots of finances there, that means that he was like the tax collector of tax collectors, that he was one of the higher-ups. And that some of the tax collectors that were collecting taxes in that area, they would know that he was the chief. He was their boss. And then notice also that it says that he was wealthy. Well, if you've been around the church, if you've studied the Bible before, how did tax collectors get wealthy? They stole and charged a little more taxes and stole from people. So if Rome said, hey, you need to give us this much money, and they would add 10% or 20% to that and say, well, you need to give us this much money, and then they would just, take off the top. I mean, it wasn't well organized. But the other thing that's interesting about Zacchaeus is that he was a Jew. And Jews did not need to be serving Rome. Remember, at this time in the world, the Jews in the nation of Israel are under occupation from the Romans. And so it is extremely, extremely important for us to understand, for the context of our passage today, that Zacchaeus was a Jew serving the enemy. And so he was despised as one of those guys, a defector from the cause, a defector even from your own country. Now look at verse 3. It says, and he wanted to see who Jesus was. Jesus was popular at this time. I mean, I'm sure he wanted to see Jesus like everyone else wanted to see Jesus. Why did you want to see Jesus? Well, you might get a free meal. Might see a miracle. I mean, I've heard he made blind people see, lame people walk. I even heard he can raise the dead. So, of course, when the name Jesus comes circulating through your town, it's kind of like, if the president or some official that was extremely popular, some actor, actress, somebody with fame came to your town, everybody gathers around and flocks around and wants to see them in person, wants to get an autograph, wants to see if they can get to know him. It says that he wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. Okay, he was a wee little man. May have had short man syndrome. We don't know. Verse 4 says, so he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. Okay, so the crowd's following Jesus, and Zacchaeus, being wee, he can't see over the crowd, and so he decides, well, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run down the road. He's heading this way. I'm going to run down the road. There's a tree there. I'm going to climb up in the tree because I want to see Jesus. I want to see what the big deal is. I mean, does he have, bleached blonde hair? What's the big deal here? I want to see him because everybody else gets to see him and I can't. And so he climbs up this tree, since Jesus was coming that way. Verse 5, it says, when Jesus reached the spot where Zacchaeus was, he looked up into the tree and he said to him, Zacchaeus, you come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. And so Zacchaeus at once came down and welcomed him gladly. Now you have to understand, it's like Kevin Durant coming to Enid, okay? If you have Kevin Durant and he's coming to Enid and he's, in the parade and you're climbed up somewhere and because you want to see Kevin and you look down and Kevin looks up and says, hey Eric, I'm going to share dinner with you tonight. This is a big deal. I mean, wouldn't you feel like, hey, Kevin Durant is, he wants to spend time with me. He wants to come over and see me. And this is exactly how Zacchaeus felt. I mean, he was just blown away that Jesus, with all the crowds following him, probably hundreds, maybe even thousands of people, most scholars believe, are following him at this time, following him through Jericho, through the streets, and he picks Zacchaeus to hang out with. Wow. And then look at Zacchaeus' front. He came down immediately and welcomed him gladly. And then look at verse 7. All the people, that's all the crowds that were around Jesus, all the people saw this and began to mutter. You know what muttering is? Kids, do you know what muttering is? Muttering is when your parents ask you to take out the trash and you really don't want to. You mutter, well, I don't have to do it. My sister should have done the trash. It's not my job this week. It's her job. And maybe we mutter, okay? So they're muttering. The crowd is muttering here, okay? It says all the people saw this and they began to mutter. And look what they mutter. He has gone to be the guest of a sinner. He is going with a chief tax collector. Can you believe this? Jesus is crazy. What is he doing? Look at verse 8. It says, but this, now, you understand, we're reading this passage, and it's like giving us pieces of this, We don't know what was said. We don't know how long Jesus was there. But I'm assuming it's probably after dinner, okay? Because when you ate dinner in that day, you reclined by the table. And notice in verse 8, it says, but Zacchaeus stood up, okay? So this is what it says. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. Now, what did we learn earlier about Zacchaeus? He was a wealthy man, which means he had a lot of stuff. And he said, look what I'm going to do. I'm going to give half of my stuff, half of my favorite things of this world, I'm going to give it to the poor. And then look what else he said. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, which he's a chief tax collector, so he cheated a lot of people out of a lot of stuff, he says, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Now, wouldn't you like to have recorded here, what did Jesus say to him? How was hanging out with Jesus? What did they do at dinner? What happened here? But we just get this. And then look at verse 9. And Jesus said back to Zacchaeus, Today, salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham. What Jesus is meaning by that is, hey, he's a Jew. He's a son of Abraham, just like the rest of us. And we kind of forget that he's not a Roman. He works for Rome. He's made some bad choices about working for Rome by stealing and being a thief. But he is a son of Abraham. And then look what it says in verse 10. Jesus says this, for the Son of Man, Jesus talking about himself, calls himself the Son of Man. For the Son of Man came to seek and save good people. For the Son of Man came to seek and save those that already knew him. For the Son of Man came to seek and save who? The lost. The lost. Why were the crowds so shocked? If Jesus, the Son of God, his mission was to seek and save the lost, not seek and save the saved. It's to seek and save the lost. There's a popular and famous minister from Oklahoma City, Craig Rochelle at Life Church. He shared this story at a conference that I attended, and this is what he said. He said, there's a well-known person in our community of Oklahoma City that, they're very well known for questionable behavior. He's well known for making a lot of money doing very sinful things. And in some circles, this man is very well known for very sinful behaviors. And I bumped into him in public one time at a place, and he said, hey, aren't you that Life Church TV guy? And Craig said, well, yeah, I am. And he said, man, I've never been to church in my life, but if there was anybody in town I probably want to ask some questions, it would be you. Could we get together sometime? I want to ask you some questions about God. And Craig said, well, I thought to myself, and I thought, well, sure. Well, where do you want to meet? And so they set up a time in the future where they were going to meet at a restaurant, and they were going to talk. And so Craig says, so I came to the restaurant that day, and sure enough, he was sitting there at the restaurant, right there at the bar, drinking in the middle of the day, smoking a cigarette. He said, I walked up and I sat down at the bar, and as I did, I felt the people in the restaurant looking at me with those very churchy-like eyes. You know those churchy looks? He said, I could feel the heat. I could feel the judgment. Immediately, I felt condemned. People were whispering, and I could hear it. Shh, Pastor Craig. Pastor Craig, look who he's eating with. Look who he's sharing a meal with. And oh my, is that Pastor Craig's beer there? And that week, he said, we even got phone calls in the church office, people complaining that I was seen at a bar hanging out with a well-known sinner. And my staff responded, darn it, there goes Pastor Craig acting like Jesus again. But the fact is, that's what Jesus did. That's what God is calling us to do, is to somehow make a connection with people who are far from God. And let me give you a news flash this morning, just in case you didn't know this, okay? People that don't know Jesus act like people who don't know Jesus. Okay, and if you expect them to just act like one of us, that they're just good and they got their life all together, because we don't have any problems, right? We're holy and we're pure. If you expect them to be like that, that's probably not the case. That's why Jesus calls them lost. I know that lost term. People say, why do you always use the term lost? Can we use a different word? It's like, no, we'll use the word Jesus uses. He says they're lost. And what do you do with lost things? You try to what? Find them. Jesus taught parables on this about a lady that lost a coin, and she's turning her house upside down looking for this lost coin. How much more should we be looking for lost people? We shouldn't expect people to act like Christians when they don't know Jesus. You know, I get the pastoral surprise every once in a while when I run into people in public. It's amazing what happens to me sometimes. I'm usually at the grocery store, at Walmart or something, and I run into people, and it's amazing how the conversation, you know, I just want to say hi. So usually if you're in public and you see me, you don't have to run, you don't have to hide, you know, go to the dressing rooms or the bathroom real suddenly, or, you know, I just want to say hi usually, okay? But I mean, I walk up to people and they're like, you know, we were supposed to be there last week, and I was in Tahiti, you know, and then the week before that we were sick, and the week before that, honey, do you remember? Yeah, we don't know why we weren't there the week before that, but, you know, we're going to be back. I'm like, what are you talking about? I just want to say hi. It's like, oh, church attendance, right. You're supposed to be, in church. Okay, and, you know, this is amazing. So people, you know, they got some stuff in their cart maybe that they're a little embarrassed about. They're not proud of it. People like diving on the cart, you know, trying to cover the case of beer they got in the cart. You know, it's just really awkward sometimes. And, you know, sometimes I feel like it's hard, you know, being a pastor, but they feel like, you know, as soon as I'm in their presence, they got to clean up their act or something. You know, we got to act like, you know. Thing is, we need to prepare ourselves. We really do. Because if we're going to get serious about this mission, we need to realize that some of the last people that you and I might imagine becoming Christians are some of the very first people that Jesus called in Scripture. Think about that. How many times did Jesus call those that were already righteous, those that already knew about God? Jesus goes around calling some of the last people that we would think need to become Christians. You know, what we would do today is we go after the good people, right? Good people, nice people, clean people, people of good reputation, but not Jesus. It seems that the Son of God would go after the most unpopular, notorious sinners that have terrible reputations and big life problems. And let's be frank, that makes most of us very uncomfortable. But maybe when we are dealing with those who are still lost, we just need to be reminded of this truth. The more conscious I am of the work God has yet to do in me, the less critical I am of the work God has yet to do in others. Let's say it again. The more conscious I am of the work God has yet to do in me, the less critical I am of the work that God has yet to do in others. So you walk up to that person, and even by their sheer appearance, you're maybe turned off by them. Remember that God has a work to do in their life. God will do the changing. And I'm wondering if maybe we live this and we remember this, that we won't be as critical of people that are far from God. Because ministry is messy when you're dealing with messy people. And I imagine that Zacchaeus was a mess. Pretty messy, you know, chief tax collector, thief, dishonest, bad reputation. But Jesus said, I want to share a meal with you. And I want to accept you just as a person. No, I don't accept what you do or what you've done, but I want you to know I love you as a person. And after a shared meal with Jesus, we find out that the rest is history, because here's what Jesus understood that's the truth. Connection fuels influence. Connection fuels influence. If you want to start influencing lives for Jesus Christ, then you have to start by connecting with people. It's your mission. Jesus modeled it for his disciples. Meet people right where they are and just how they are. God will do the changing later. What was it that Jesus said to the disciples? He called some fishermen, and then he told them later that you will become fishers of men. All right? And when you clean fish, what do? You're going to go capture fish. What do? You get fish and you clean them, and then you put them back into the lake, and then you fish and you catch them, right? No. What do? Well, you catch the fish, you bring them out of the water, and then you clean them. And for some reason in Christianity, we've got the catching fishers of men thing all wrong. We got it all backwards. That they're clean and then they come. It's like, no, they come and then they are made clean by Jesus Christ. But that just honestly isn't the way we think it should work, or isn't what we're comfortable with. But we see it time and time again. And I know what some of you are thinking. Okay, really? Okay, then how? Okay, I feel like I don't have anything in common with these people, okay? I mean, I just don't feel like I've got anything in common with these people. And that's why I don't talk to them, and that's why I kind of avoid them, and that's why I won't go meet my neighbor because he looks kind of shady, and I just don't know what he's into. And, I just kind of stay away from shady people. But those are the very people that Jesus would probably say, hey, you want to come over and have some brownies? You got to get to know them. You got to find out. It's real simple. We don't have to make this complex. It's really, really simple. I mean, ask him or ask yourself, what do we have in common? What do they like to talk about? What do we have? Common experiences, common interests, common needs, common hurts. Do we like to fish? Do they like to play golf? Do they like to cook? Do they like to shop? Maybe they like to sleep. Do they have kids? Are you interested in soccer, baseball, basketball, whatever? Just find out ways that you can get to know them and connect with them. And I want to encourage you to do this in a casual way, okay? I'm a pastor, and so sometimes if I go and meet someone for the first time and I say, hey, I'm a minister at a church, that's a bad start to the conversation, okay? Now, sometimes I feel really, really guilty because I feel like I'm kind of deceiving people because I don't say it up front. Okay, like I was dealing with a business guy the other day, and he was doing some work, and I was talking to him, and he was just, cuss word, and I was like, man, I should have told him I was a minister, because as soon as he knows, he's going to die, and the language will stop. And so we get later in the conversation, and I said, well, I said, I know you've done some work for a couple of the ministers in my church, and then, man, that's amazing how that language just completely changed, And so I kind of keep that incognito. I just feel like that's not the most important thing for me to do when I meet someone. So I'm very casual and very entry level when I meet people. I don't come out there, hey, I'm Pastor Eric and you need Jesus, It's like I try to be somewhat normal, okay? I don't cut straight to the Jesus stuff. I love the Oklahoma City Thunder, so if I'm thinking they look like a Thunder fan, I talk Thunder. I talk KC Chiefs football, because Kansas City Chiefs are my team. Fantasy football, had a draft up here last night at the church with a bunch of guys, so I'll talk fantasy football. I'll talk life, school, connections, kids. I love sports connections, but my goal is to find common ground. When I meet somebody that I don't know anything about and they don't know much about me, just find some common ground. And why do we go to these efforts with these people? Why did Jesus go through these efforts with these people? Why? Because connection fuels influence. Something that Tim Harlow, and those of you that are in small groups know Tim Harlow wrote the Life on Mission curriculum that we're doing in our small group ministry. Something Tim Harlow told me one time, he goes, it's kind of what I call, and he goes, I know we're church people, but it's what I call the beer moment. My wife just died that I said that. But he says it's the moment at which the person you're talking to thinks, you know what, I could sit down and have a beer with them and I'll be okay. Contextualize that for me, it'd be a Coke, because I'm just don't like beer. And so, it's like, make that person think, what, I'd like to go get a Coke with him sometime, just sit down and pick his brain. You need to have that moment, that connection with people, because connection fuels influence. But I think sometimes we make the mission way too complex. When we've got a certain way that we got to dress and a certain way that we carry ourselves, we got to carry our Bibles with us everywhere we go because we got to quote scripture at people. We got to bang them on the head with the Bible. It's like kind of like kamikaze Christians. They're so religious they can't be normal. They just have to tell you what God told them this week in a dream. And, And then there's the other extreme. I think there's those of us who are just apathetic to the mission at all. I'm not going to tell anyone about Jesus. I'm not going to try to do anything. I'm going to try to be normal. I don't care. I'm more about, being nice and looking right and, going through the motions of those kind of things. And Jesus is not asking us to be these nice-looking Christian people all dressed up, sitting in a pew, doing nothing for the gospel. That is not what he's called us to do. That we be more concerned about being untainted by the world. That we won't even associate with a non-Christian because they're kind of dirty. Now, this morning as I'm saying this, if you were thinking in your mind, is Eric saying that now holiness doesn't matter? I mean, does holiness matter to God? Absolutely. If you think for a second this morning that I'm saying as long as you have passion for Jesus, as long as you're trying to reach lost people, then you can just continue sinning, then you're both foolish and you're ignorant. Jesus does care about holiness. He does care about personal purity. He calls us in the Word to be holy as He is holy. And your witness to the world is destroyed without your character, your integrity, and your righteous deeds. But He puts you on a mission. And when you defected from the ranks of the world and you joined the ranks of heaven, that absolutely means that you will and should try to reach out and connect to people who are far from God. Because if you and I don't reach them right here in our Jerusalem, then who's going to? I think Jesus is very concerned about this mission of reaching the lost. But sometimes I think we can get so concerned and caught up with the fact that we'll never smoke, drink, cuss, chew, or hang out with people who do, that because of that, the good news is hindered in going to people and delivering them from eternal darkness into eternal light. And what did Jesus say at the end of the passage about Zacchaeus? What did he say at the end of the passage? Look right there in verse 10. For the Son of Man came to seek and save. Seek and save, seek and save, seek and save. The good people, those that already got their lives together, no. Seek and save the lost. And Jesus wants people who are willing to go get out there and do a little seeking and saving themselves. To take off our piety, to not be so concerned about keeping our Christian gloves just snow white. That we would actually go and engage and connect and share with people that are far from God. Share with them the love that Jesus has for them. I get a newspaper every week from a church, and I subscribe to it. Southeast Christian Church puts out a newspaper. This newspaper's newsprint, just like an Enid newspaper, except it's a lot thicker. And they put out a weekly paper, this church from Louisville, Kentucky, about 23,000 people. This week's paper, when I got it, on the first page, it said, blank becomes a church lady, except blank had a word. Now, we're family day in church. We got kids here, and so I want to be sensitive to that, so I'm not going to say what it was. But for the adults, it's people that work at clubs, and they do dancing, that kind of stuff, you know? So, okay. And so this lady is now a church lady, and I thought, well, that's interesting. How did this come about? And so I read the story. Yeah, this lady was doing her profession, and at the place where she did her profession, every Thursday night, a group of church ladies made a potluck dinner with a bunch of snacks and then a bunch, brownies, because, brownies makes everything better. And they brought all this food in to this bar, to this club. And their whole purpose was to build relationships with people that did those activities. Now, I just whoa, okay, so I'm reading this article, and I'm hearing about this, and I'm like, okay. So they literally made food, brought it in, shared it with these people, and tried to build a relationship with them, and that was it. And they would talk to these ladies about whatever they wanted to talk about. And this story that was in this paper was talking about this one lady who would avoid the church ladies but eat their food. She loved Thursday nights because it was the best meal she'd had all week. The church ladies would come in about 6 o'clock till about 8:30, and then the night would start, and the ladies would need to get to work, and so then the church ladies would leave. Well, the story goes that she hit rock bottom. She'd been married before, had 2 kids that she was trying to support, got divorced, then had a boyfriend, moved in the boyfriend moved out. You know how that story goes. And after she had done these things, she couldn't afford where she was living. She was behind on her bills. She was about to have her electricity and her water cut off. And she was really, really what we call down on her luck. And so she did what everybody does in these situations. You go to the bartender. So she went to the bartender, and she's pouring out her heart. I've got this going on. I've got that. And he said, maybe you should talk to the church ladies on Thursday nights. And she's like, what? I want to talk to the church ladies. They don't want to talk to me. And he's like, no, I see him talk to everybody. And I don't know, I've seen him help some ladies. And then I've seen some ladies get out of here and start a new life, and maybe you should talk to the church ladies about it. And so she did. That Thursday night, when they brought the food in and the church ladies were there visiting, she met a church lady who helped her get out of that destructive lifestyle, that helped her get on her feet financially, that brought her to church and introduced her to Jesus Christ. Now that lady is a Christian, and guess what ministry she signed up for when she joined the church? Yeah, she's a church lady now and goes down to places on Thursday nights where no one else really wants to go and makes food and shares it with other ladies who are lost, who need to hear about Jesus. The bottom line is there was a few church ladies who went and built connections with some non-church ladies, and you get to see the end result. It's amazing what God can do through some potluck at a club on Thursday nights. There's another example I want to share with you this morning, but I want you to hear his story from himself. So if you would, turn your attention to the screens and let's look at Rich's story.
Well, when I first came back to going to church as an adult, I came back as very angry, a lot of emotional issues, very distant, very unbelieving in God from what I was taught in my life. Just basically 35 years of being a non-believer. I walked in and it didn't seem like a church as I saw it when I was growing up. Now I've learned that this is not a church, it's a building. The people inside of it are the church, and that's the most important thing to me. I had come back to the church first to support my wife. She was doing her testimony here, and the only reason I came was to just be of support to her. That was it. I stood against the back wall as my wife did her testimony, and I really was not wanting anything to do with anybody or anything there. But as I sat at the back of the church and watched her unfold her story, I just started to have tears run down my face. I don't know if it was because of what I was feeling at that time for my wife's situation. Norma's small group later actually told me it was actually because Jesus was opening my heart and he wanted me. And I found that kind of strange, but I was going with it. I wanted to talk to her more about it, but she didn't have time because they were taking my wife out in, response to her, doing her testimony. But she grabbed another worship team member to come and talk to me. And it just so happened to be, it was the gentleman that was in the drama that day. So he took about an hour and a half of his time after church to talk with me. He says, why don't you come back again next week and just see what happens? And I was kind of like standoffish about it. I was like, I really don't think. He's like, just give it a try for her. I was like, okay, no problem. So I came back the next week and I did the same thing. My wife went and sat down with all her small group at the church in the seats, and I went and stood against the back wall and didn't want really nothing to do with anybody, and kind of pushed communion away when it came once again. But once again, as I'm standing against that back wall, I start to cry again. And it was just uncontrollable, and I just didn't understand it. And that's when I finally realized that day that my heart was actually really, really starting to open. Now I'm learning that it's not the way that I was taught, and there's more to God and to Jesus than just following a bunch of rules. And that's what really stuck out to me. After service, I got back together with one of the gentlemen that I had talked to the previous week that actually got me to come back. And he had actually said to me, I'm going to start a small group, and would you be interested in that? And I was like, well, what's a small group? He's like, well, that's when we get together and we study the Bible and we talk about Christ and this and that. And I was like, you know what? I'll be honest with you. I said, you got me to come back, and I'm noticing something that's happening in my life. I go, I feel something. I go, so you know what? Out of respect for my wife and just for you for taking the time to talk to me, yeah, I'll give it a try. So that's when I started my journey getting into small groups. The decision to make Christ my Savior actually came pretty quick. So I came to church in August. I started small group in September, and I do believe I was baptized just the weekend before Thanksgiving. When I went into that water and came out, I felt so refreshed, so clean, and it was like all that anger that I was carrying for years was gone. And the best thing about that was I made a decision at that time was because I was given a clean slate that anybody that had wronged me in those 35 years that I had been away from God got a clean slate with me, because if I deserved it, they deserved it. If we would not have had the people in our life that reached out to us from this church in our darkest time, in my wife's needs when she was going through her situation, I actually don't think that I would have ever come back to a church. I don't think I ever would have become a Christ follower. What I saw when I had total strangers reaching out, not only to my wife, because these people were her friends, but they were total strangers to me. And these people were ministering to me as much as they were my wife. For a person that was away from church for 35 years, I would look forward to being here every weekend. I enjoy serving in the ministries. For a lot of people who know me my whole life and hear what I'm doing now, when they hear that I work in ministry at our church and I counsel with people and I help others, they are completely just blown away by it, because it's not the type of person I was growing up.
Did you catch that, church? If it hadn't been for people reaching out to my wife in her time of need, and then being willing to stay after church for an hour and a half and talk to me and to reach out to me, I don't think I would ever have come to Jesus Christ. And it really raises the question, who's going to meet Rich? Who's going to invite him to be in their group? Who's going to take the time to answer his questions about God and really try to connect with him? Because that connection is what brought his wife in, and that connection is what eventually brought Rich into that relationship with Jesus Christ. And there's people like him all around us that are just waiting. As we close today, I want to share a scripture, Matthew chapter 9, verses 9 through 13. And in our small groups, we'll be studying this in depth this week, but you can just follow along on the screens. It says, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at a tax collector's booth. Here he goes again. Follow me, Jesus told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, there he goes again. Many tax collectors and sinners. There's some translations that actually say tax collectors, prostitutes, and other notorious sinners were there and came and ate with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they asked the disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? And on hearing this, Jesus says, it is not the healthy that need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Isn't it amazing how Jesus ends both of these passages and encounters and eating, spending time with sinners? First one is Zacchaeus. He said what? Seek and save, seek and save, seek and save the lost. What does he say here? Come to call, come to call, come to call. Seek and save, come to call. Seek and save, come to call. Not the righteous, but the lost. If I were to paraphrase what Jesus is saying, I'd say this about that passage. Jesus is saying, I'm letting you know up front that my goal is to not have this holy little huddle of people that live in this little box and they get everything right all the time. If that was what I wanted, then I'd just take you up to heaven right now. But you don't live in heaven right now. This is earth, and it's messy here. And we're finding my lost kids, and we're getting them ready for heaven. And we do that by sitting down and sharing with them and eating with them and connecting with them just as they are, sick and messy and lost. And if you're good with that, then I want you to join the team and live a life on mission, because connection fuels influence. Connection fuels influence.